They destroyed my life. All because of a lie, my brother told. Now I have the truth and I'm coming for him? I never thought the people I loved the most could destroy me, until Ryan made them believe I was a monster. My own family turned their backs on me, and all because of a lie I couldn't even fight. But the truth? It's about to destroy him. Growing up, I always felt like I was invisible in my own family. It's crazy to think about it now, but back then, it was just the way things were. I had an older brother, Ryan, and everything about him screamed favorite child from the get-go, even though there was nothing exceptional about him. I'd bust my ass for grades, trying to make my parents proud, but they didn't care unless Ryan was doing well. If Ryan failed, Mom and Dad would swoop in like superheroes. "It's okay, honey. You'll get him next time," they'd say, rubbing his back, making everything feel like a minor hiccup. But when I brought home top grades, I was met with indifference, or worse. "That's it?" "Ryan did better at your age," Dad would say, barely looking up from his newspaper. It was like I didn't exist unless it was to be compared to him. Ryan was, hands down, the golden child. He barely scraped by to graduate high school, but when he did, there was a celebration like he'd cured cancer. A party, a shiny new car, everything he could ask for was handed to him on a silver platter. Meanwhile, when I graduated with honors, the most I got was a half-hearted pat on the back and a check for $500. That was it. I tried to hide my bitterness, but it cut deep. I could see it clearly that day when Ryan pulled into the driveway in his new car, smiling like he'd just won the lottery, while I stood in the corner, an unnoticed shadow. And still, I tried to be the good son. I wanted to feel loved. But it was like I was always walking through the house as a stranger. I realized pretty early on that no matter how hard I worked or how much I succeeded, I'd never be Ryan. I'd never be enough in their eyes. The turning point came when I decided enough was enough. After graduation, I knew I had to get away. I wasn't going to waste my life in that house, hoping for a little validation that would never come. I applied to a university in a city far from home, just so I could escape. When I told my parents, there was no surprise, no excitement, just a distant, "Don't forget to call us, okay?" That was it. A year earlier, when Ryan decided to go to college and dropped out after just one semester, the entire family cried as if he was leaving for war. I had to fight back the tears that day. It felt like I wasn't even leaving for a future. I was just being discarded. The day I left, no one came to see me off. I don't think anyone even noticed. But I didn't need their approval anymore. The only thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer live my life trying to earn their love. I was on my own. I worked my ass off in college, earning my MBA in just 5 years, and landed a solid job right after. My relationship with my family grew even more distant. I only went home for major holidays, but even then, it felt like I was an afterthought. Ryan, on the other hand, kept failing upward. After dropping out of school, he struggled to find a job, and somehow, my parents opened a business just for him. They called it his chance to be independent. But no one ever asked me how I was doing. No one cared about my successes or struggles. The moment something went wrong with Ryan, though, the entire family would rally around him. No questions asked. I was invisible. But I thought, maybe that was the worst of it. I thought I'd reached the bottom of the unfairness. But I had no idea that the real tragedy was still to come. Things were finally looking up. I'd managed to escape the clutches of my family's indifference, carved my own path, and even found someone who saw me for who I really was. Her name was Jenny. We met during college, both of us from the same small town, and it didn't take long for us to fall for each other. She was the first person who truly cared, who made me feel like I mattered. Jenny wasn't like my family. She didn't compare me to anyone or expect anything from me. She simply loved me for being me. It felt like a relief to finally be seen in the right light. We graduated, and soon after, we decided to move back to my hometown to start fresh. Jenny landed a solid job, and I was finally at peace. My family was still distant, but for once I didn't care. Jenny and I had each other, and that was enough. But everything changed the moment Ryan came into the picture. It was the winter of 2006, around Christmas time. I'd brought Jenny home to meet my family. I thought it would be just another awkward gathering, but it turned out to be much more unsettling than I expected. My parents, who had barely shown any interest in me for years, suddenly treated me like I was worth something again, but only because of Jenny. They were practically fawning over her, hanging on every word she said. Ryan, though, he had been distant at first, but as the evening wore on, he started staring at Jenny. It wasn't just casual glances. He was really looking at her, almost as if she were a new puzzle he needed to figure out. I didn't think much of it at the time. Ryan was always a little strange, and maybe he was just being his usual weird self. But looking back, I should have trusted my instincts. After that night, Ryan started showing up at our house more and more. Before, I'd only see him a few times every few months, but now, it was like he was practically living there. He'd pop in randomly, sometimes just to hang out for a few minutes, other times staying for hours. Jenny and I would be sitting on the couch trying to relax after a long day, and suddenly he'd be there. At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal, but the more it happened, the more I grew uncomfortable. It was becoming impossible to enjoy my time with Jenny without Ryan lurking around, always overstaying his welcome. Then came the day when things crossed the line. I was at work and Jenny had the day off. When I came home, she was acting weird. She seemed off, tense, distant. I asked her what was wrong, and after a long pause, she finally opened up. Ryan, he was here earlier. I don't know, Michael. He was just too much. He was way too friendly, and I don't know, it just made me uncomfortable. Hearing that made my stomach drop. Ryan had always been a little inappropriate, but this was different. Something was off about him, something I hadn't picked up on until now. I had to put my foot down. I told Ryan straight up, "You can't just keep showing up here all the time. It's too much. You need to back off." Ryan feigned surprise, acting like he didn't know what I was talking about. "Sorry, man. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'll lay off, I promise," he said, giving me that stupid fake smile he always wore when he was trying to dodge responsibility. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. The next day, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was cold, angry. "Michael, I can't believe you would treat Ryan like that. He's your brother. He just wants to spend time with you, and you're pushing him away. How selfish can you be?" I couldn't believe it. My own parents, the people who had ignored me my whole life, were now defending Ryan's obsession with Jenny. "Ryan just wants to be close to his brother," my mom yelled, like that was the only thing that mattered. "Why can't you just let him be around?" It was like the final straw. I could feel my frustration bubbling up. Ryan's obsession with Jenny was no longer just a nuisance. It was becoming dangerous. But my family didn't care. They were still stuck in their delusion that Ryan could do no wrong, that everything he did was excusable. Ryan, after all that, kept his word. He stopped coming over every day. But something felt wrong. Every time I saw him, he had this strange, knowing smile on his face, one that didn't sit right with me. His eyes were colder now, almost like he was hiding something, like he was biding his time for something bigger. I didn't trust him anymore, not even a little. But I had no idea just how far Ryan was willing to go. He was playing a long game, and when the time was right, everything would come crashing down. And when it did, I knew there was no turning back. For a while, things felt like they were finally back to normal. Ryan had stopped showing up uninvited, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd gotten through to him. But still, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense that something wasn't right. Every time I ran into Ryan, he'd look at me with a strange satisfaction, like he had won some silent victory. It wasn't resentment or anger in his eyes, just this smug sense of being in control. Jenny noticed it too. She'd ask me what was wrong with him, but neither of us could pinpoint exactly what he was planning. We thought things had finally calmed down, but I didn't realize that Ryan wasn't giving up. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came in July 2015, when I received a phone call from my dad in the middle of the afternoon. His voice was ice cold, filled with a rage I'd never heard from him before. "Get here now." "You don't belong in this family anymore," he snarled before hanging up. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't make sense of it. What had happened? What had I done this time? But I didn't have a choice. I rushed over to the house, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. When I walked in, the atmosphere hit me like a wall. It was thick with tension, suffocating. Jenny was sitting in the corner, her hands clutching her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. My parents, relatives, even some old friends, all of them were there, staring at me with contempt, like I was a stranger. Ryan stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed, with that same twisted grin on his face. I didn't understand. Was this some kind of joke? Then Amanda, a girl I'd known since high school, stepped forward. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, and she looked at me like I was a monster. You attacked me at a party a few weeks ago, she said, her voice shaking but firm. And you threatened me, told me I'd regret telling anyone. If I didn't stay quiet, you'd ruin my life. My blood ran cold. What the hell was she talking about? I hadn't touched her. I hadn't even spoken to her in months. And then she pulled out her phone. On the screen, there were texts. Horrible, threatening texts, supposedly from me. I recognized the number, but the words, they weren't mine. They couldn't be. But they were so perfectly crafted that I couldn't argue against them right away. Amanda's eyes gleamed with triumph as she handed the phone to my parents. "This is what he sent me," she said, her voice cracking. "He's dangerous. He's not the person you think he is." Without even giving me a chance to explain, my parents turned on me. My mom's face twisted in disgust as she looked me up and down. "I knew it, Michael. I knew something was wrong with you all along," she spat. "How could you do this to a woman? How could you disgrace this family?" I was shaking with rage, with confusion, with disbelief, but before I could speak, my dad was on me. He lunged forward and hit me, hard. The force of the punch sent me crashing to the floor. "You're a disgrace," he yelled, his voice full of venom. "I don't ever want to see your face again. You're no longer welcome here." Everything in me wanted to scream, to fight back. But I was paralyzed. Jenny was the only person I thought would stand by me. But when I turned to her, hoping for some support, her words shattered me. "We're done, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't do this anymore." It felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. Jenny, the one person I thought would always be there, was gone. Ryan just stood there, watching the whole thing unfold, a sick smile spreading across his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just observed as my entire world came crashing down. He had orchestrated this, every single part of it. And he was loving every second. I was kicked out of the house, humiliated, forced to leave with nothing. My phone buzzed constantly, notifications pouring in. Ryan had sent out the screenshots of the fake texts to the family's WhatsApp group, and from there, it spread like wildfire. The company I worked for fired me immediately. "We can't have someone like you working here," they said, as if I were some kind of criminal. Friends started unfriending me. People I'd known for years turned their backs. And Jenny? She filed for divorce, sending me the papers with a cold, final message. "It's over." The last shred of hope I had left in me was crushed when my parents sent me a letter. "We are officially disowning you." Ryan's work was done. He stood above the wreckage of my life, looking down at me with that same cruel smile. He had won. He had destroyed everything. But little did he know, he had pushed me into the deepest corner of my soul. And some people, when they fall to rock bottom, they don't stay there. They rise. I wasn't done yet. And Ryan had no idea what was coming for him. The months following my downfall felt like a blur. I had become a shadow of myself, drifting aimlessly through the city's streets. There was no home, no place to return to. No one cared anymore. I spent my nights in smoky bars, drinking away the memories, drinking away the pain. I woke up every morning with a splitting headache, the harsh reality of my life crushing me. The weight of everything, Jenny's tears, the image of my father's fists, Ryan's cruel laughter, haunted me like a never-ending loop. By February 2016, it all came crashing down when I was involved in a severe car accident. I was thrown into the hospital, unconscious for several days, and spent 5 weeks recovering in a haze of painkillers and regret. But even in that state, the feeling of isolation never left. When the hospital called Jenny, trying to reach her as my emergency contact, she didn't answer. She didn't even bother to return the call. It was the final nail in the coffin. She was gone, just like the rest of them. No one came to visit me. No one asked if I was okay. I was a nobody, lost in a sea of self-loathing. One evening, I was aimlessly wandering the streets, trying to drown out the pain, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Michael? Is that you? I turned to see James, an old college friend, standing in front of me. He barely recognized me, but once he did, his face softened with surprise. Man, you look like you've been through hell, he said, concern in his voice. I didn't know how to respond. I was ashamed, disgusted with myself, but at the same time, I was relieved to see someone who didn't look at me like I was a monster. James had built a successful consulting company by that point, and after a brief conversation, he offered me a chance to get back on my feet. A real opportunity. I almost turned him down. I had nothing left in me. But something in his eyes, some spark of hope I hadn't felt in so long, pushed me to say yes. But I knew, deep down, that this time would be different. This time, I wasn't going to let my past destroy me. I couldn't. The next few months were a blur of hard work and rebuilding. James introduced me to Derek, one of his colleagues, and the two of us became fast friends. Derek was rough around the edges, but his drive and determination inspired me to push myself harder. I joined a gym, and at first it was painful. My body was weak, the remnants of the man I used to be, broken and fragile. But slowly, with Derek's guidance, I transformed. I gained weight, muscle, not fat. I went from 154 pounds of scrawny lost weight to 216 pounds of pure, solid muscle. I felt stronger every day, physically and mentally. It wasn't just my body that changed. Derek even gave me his last name for a while, as a symbol of my transformation, a way to cut ties with my old identity. Michael, my old self, was gone. I wasn't that guy anymore. By the time 2019 rolled around, I had achieved things I never thought possible. I had built a career for myself, moved into my own apartment, and started to regain control of my life. But despite all the success, one thing still eluded me: happiness. A part of me still feared that my past would catch up with me. I was terrified that the moment I let my guard down, everything would fall apart again. Then I met Kim. She worked at a local coffee shop, always smiling, always friendly. Kim was sweet, with a kindness that I hadn't experienced in years. We hit it off instantly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the spark of something real. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward her. But even as my heart slowly began to open again, the shadows of my past never fully left. I had never told her what had happened. The weight of it all was suffocating. I knew I couldn't keep hiding the truth, not from someone I cared about. One afternoon, as we sat together in the park, I held her hand and looked her in the eyes. "Kim, there's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "About my past, about everything that happened." I could feel the walls around me rising, my chest tightening. I told her everything, about Ryan, about my family, about the accusations, the betrayal. I braced myself for her to walk away, to look at me with disgust. I waited for her to get up and leave, just like everyone else had. But instead, she squeezed my hand and looked me straight in the eyes. "I believe you," she said quietly, her voice full of certainty. I froze. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected her to stay, to stand by me. "Even after everything I've told you? The things I've done? The mistakes?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Yes," she replied softly. "I believe in you. I know the man you are now." For the first time in 8 years, I felt like I wasn't alone. For the first time, someone truly believed in me. But even as I basked in that fleeting moment of happiness, I knew deep down that my past wasn't done with me. The ghosts of my past were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I wasn't prepared for what was coming next. The truth was, the people I thought I had left behind were about to make a comeback, and their vengeance would be nothing like I had ever imagined. It was May 2023, and for the first time in years, I thought things were finally falling into place. My life was stable. I had a job I was proud of, and I even had Kim by my side, someone who believed in me when no one else did. I had rebuilt myself, brick by brick, and I thought I could finally breathe without looking over my shoulder. Then came the call. The phone rang, and when I saw the unknown number, something in my gut twisted. I didn't pick up, but the moment I heard the voice on the other end, my heart froze. "Michael, it's me, Amanda ... I almost dropped the phone. Amanda. The person who had been the catalyst for my destruction, the one who had lied, manipulated, and tore my life apart, was calling me. 8 years had passed, and now she was back. I hung up immediately, my hands trembling as they gripped the phone. My chest tightened. The nightmare was resurfacing. Kim, who had been sitting beside me, noticed the change in my demeanor. Her eyes filled with concern, and she gently reached out, taking my hand. "Michael, what's wrong?" she asked softly, squeezing my hand. I didn't have the strength to tell her. Not yet. I couldn't bring myself to explain how the past was threatening to swallow me whole again. The phone rang again, piercing the silence. This time, Kim answered. She switched it to speakerphone, and I could hear the voice of a man on the other side. "I'm Mark, Amanda's fiancé. She has something important to tell you." Amanda's voice came through, cracking and emotional. "Michael, I'm so sorry." I lied. It was all Ryan. Ryan, of course. The puppet master. The one who had masterminded everything, pulling every string to destroy me. My body tensed, my heart racing. Amanda's confession was like a punch to the gut. Her voice was shaky as she began to explain, I was manipulated. Ryan, he used me. He convinced me to frame you. He made me believe all of it. The text messages, the accusations, none of it was true. I'm so sorry, Michael. Please. Please forgive me. The words were like poison, but they were the truth I had been waiting for. The truth I knew, deep down, but had never been able to prove. Amanda went on, recounting the details of what had happened all those years ago. She told us how she and Ryan had been secretly involved, and how he had used her emotions to manipulate her into helping him destroy me. Ryan had created a fake WhatsApp account using my name and picture, fabricating messages that made it look like I had attacked her. I was speechless. My mind was racing, but all I could do was listen as Amanda broke down, guilt and regret consuming her. Ryan had played her like a pawn, and once she had served her purpose, he had discarded her without a second thought. He left me, Michael. Once everything was in motion, he didn't even look back. I was just a tool to him, Amanda sobbed. I should have known better, but he was so convincing. I didn't want to believe it, but now I see the truth. I've been living with the guilt for 8 years. I couldn't keep running anymore. I had to tell you. I had to make it right. I stood there, numb. The world around me felt like it was shifting, everything I had believed in shattering. But there was no time for emotion now. Kim's grip on my hand tightened, but her voice was calm and steady. What do you want to do, Michael? I knew what I had to do. I had waited for this moment for years, but I had to be smart. I wasn't going to let Ryan get away with it this time. Mark, I said, my voice shaking but determined. I want to meet Amanda. I need to hear this from her in person. I need proof. Amanda wanted to meet, to apologize directly, to make amends for her role in everything. Mark offered that I could bring a lawyer with me for protection. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office, facing Amanda for the first time in 8 years. She looked broken. She had aged terribly, her face gaunt and hollow. Her eyes were filled with fear as she avoided looking me in the eye. The room was cold, tense, and the only sound was the scratching of pens as my lawyer took notes. Everything was being recorded. I wasn't going to take any chances. Amanda began to speak, recounting the details of Ryan's scheme, explaining how he had manipulated her, how she had believed him without question. I made up everything. The attack, the threats, the texts, she said, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Michael. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't know what else to do. He was so convincing. Each word she spoke made my stomach turn, but I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I finally had the truth in my hands. As she continued, it became clear that Ryan had carefully orchestrated the whole thing, using Amanda's emotions to fuel the false narrative. But once I was ruined, he tossed her aside like trash. I held on to that moment, the undeniable proof that Ryan had been the mastermind all along. The plan was perfect. He had used Amanda to destroy me and then discarded her, but now I had everything I needed to take him down. But as I sat there, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on me, I knew this wasn't the end. I had a choice to make. I could sue Ryan, make him pay for everything he had done to me. But that wasn't enough. No, there was something more, Something far more satisfying. Ryan had no idea that the very person he had used as a pawn in his game of destruction was now the one who would deliver the final blow. Ryan had no idea that he had underestimated everyone, including Amanda. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Jenny. After 8 years of silence, her voice on the other end was hesitant, almost fragile. "Michael, I was wrong. I've been wrong for 8 years." She cried, her voice trembling, guilt saturating each word. I froze. The anger I had buried for so long was rising in me again. "What do you want, Jenny?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. I want to see you," she pleaded, desperate. I didn't even think about it. "I'll come, but not alone," I replied, already knowing I wasn't walking into this situation without backup. Kim needed to be there. When we met, Jenny looked nothing like the woman I once knew. She was smaller, broken, as if the weight of the years had crushed her spirit. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and for a moment I almost felt pity. But then she spoke. "Michael, after we divorced, I married Ryan. He was the only one who seemed to understand me back then." She paused, struggling to hold back the tears. "But it was all a lie. Everything. I was so stupid." I just stood there. I didn't want to hear about her regret. I didn't want her apology. I wanted something more, something real. She continued, her voice cracking. "After we married, Ryan didn't turn out to be the man I thought he was. He was lazy, useless at work. He drained our savings and then we lost everything. Our family's store, everything, gone. And he treated me and our daughter so coldly. I couldn't see it before, but now I know. I was just a pawn in his game." The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. All those years I spent thinking it was just me, that I had somehow failed. She was part of the lie too. And now she was here, trying to make amends for a betrayal I could never forget. But the real revelation hit when she told me what happened after Amanda's confession. My parents, they didn't know the truth either, Jenny admitted. But when Amanda's message came out, they saw what Ryan had done to me. To all of us. They kicked him out. For the first time in years, I felt something. Anger mixed with a strange sense of justice. Ryan, who had once been treated like the family's golden child, was now the family's disgrace. He had nothing left. Jenny's voice was small as she said, "Michael, I need you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make things right. I want to fix what I've broken." I just looked at her. The anger in me simmered, but I was no longer the person who could easily forgive and forget. I had to take control on my terms. I gave her 3 conditions. She had to tell everyone the truth about what really happened. No more lies, no more pretending I was the bad guy. I would only allow a relationship with Alice and Sarah, but nothing to do with her. Not anymore. And finally, I would choose the time and place to face my parents, but they would never be my family again. She collapsed, sobbing, but I didn't feel the need to comfort her. Not anymore. The following weeks were a blur. With the solid proof in hand, I filed a lawsuit against Ryan for defamation and the emotional havoc he'd caused. As expected, Ryan panicked. He went to his family, begging for help, but not a single person stood by him. Everyone turned their backs on him. Ryan lost everything: his family, his friends, his reputation, his job, and his money. He was a hollow shell, stripped of every ounce of power he'd once had. And as for me, I walked away from the ashes of that old life and embraced something better. Kim and I were starting a family of our own. Alice and Sarah finally got the father they had lost for so long, and we were slowly rebuilding what had been destroyed. One evening, as I cradled our newborn daughter in my arms, Kim leaned in and whispered, "Do you regret anything, Michael?" I looked out at the setting sun, the soft glow casting a peaceful light across our new life. For a moment, everything felt still, perfect, and I smiled, for the first time in years, a genuine smile. "No," I said quietly. "I've gotten everything back, everything I was meant to have. A perfect revenge. A life rebuilt from the ground up. And the man who had destroyed me? He was gone. completely erased. Now I was free, free to love, free to live. And in the end, that was the most satisfying victory of all.